The emergency session of the Galactic Council had all the charm of a funeral, if funerals typically involved 12 different species arguing in languages that sounded like malfunctioning garbage disposals. Ambassador Krelnox, whose 4 eyes were currently doing that thing where they rotated independently when he was stressed, cleared his throat, equivalent with a sound like a dying air conditioner. "Esteemed colleagues," he wheezed, "we face an unprecedented crisis. The mineral surveys of Infernus Prime must be completed, or our trade routes collapse within the next galactic quarter." A collective shudder rippled through the assembled delegates. Infernus Prime. Even the name made hardened space veterans develop mysterious stomach ailments. The planet was essentially what would happen if Hell had a particularly bad day and decided to show off. Surface temperatures averaged 800 degrees. The atmosphere was 90% sulfur compounds, and the local wildlife consisted entirely of things that could melt titanium with their morning breath. The Zephyrin expedition lasted 14 minutes, continued Krelnox, consulting his datapad with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own death certificate. The Crystalline Collective managed 18 minutes, but only because their lead surveyor was technically already dead when they started. The Vorthan Empire's attempt resulted in what our xenobiologists are calling spontaneous molecular enthusiasm, which is apparently the scientific term for, they evaporated so fast we're not sure they were ever really there. The council chamber filled with the multilingual equivalent of nervous muttering, which sounded like an orchestra of dental drills tuning up. That's when the doors burst open with the kind of confidence that usually preceded either great victories or spectacular disasters. Commander Jake Morrison strode in, followed by his human crew, all of whom looked like they'd just been invited to the galaxy's best barbecue. Jake had the kind of grin that made insurance companies nervous, and the sort of swagger that suggested he'd once arm-wrestled a black hole and won on a technicality. "Sorry we're late," Jake announced, apparently addressing the most powerful governing body in known space like they were his drinking buddies. "Traffic was murder coming through the Centauri bypass, so we heard you've got a planet nobody can visit without dying horribly. Sounds fun. Where do we sign up?" The silence that followed was so complete that several species temporarily forgot how to breathe, which for the methane-based life forms was particularly awkward. You want to volunteer?" stammered Krelnox, his eyes now spinning like slot machine reels. "For Infernus Prime, the planet that has achieved a 100% fatality rate among all previous expeditions?" "Absolutely," said Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez, stepping forward with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for winning lottery tickets. "It's been ages since we've had a proper camping trip. Hey Jake, do you think they have those volcanic vents that are good for roasting marshmallows? And please tell me someone packed the heavy-duty sleeping bags." The assembled aliens exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both confusion and the growing suspicion that humans might be the universe's most elaborate practical joke. Ambassador Vextall of the Regelian Consortium had witnessed many disturbing things during his diplomatic career. He'd seen entire star systems argue over the proper pronunciation of hello. He'd mediated peace talks between species who communicated entirely through interpretive flatulence. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for watching humans prepare for what they insisted on calling a vacation to a literal hellscape. "Okay, team," Commander Morrison announced, clapping his hands together like a summer camp counselor who'd accidentally wandered into a weapons depot. "Standard camping checklist. Martinez, did you remember the portable grill?" "Got it right here," Rosa replied, patting a device that looked suspiciously like standard military equipment, but apparently served the dual purpose of cooking food and, according to the label, achieving optimal s'mores consistency in extreme thermal environments. Vextall's translator implant made a small whimpering sound. It had been struggling with human concepts all morning, and s'mores had apparently broken something fundamental in its linguistic processing matrix. "What?" Vextall ventured, his voice climbing several octaves. "Are s'mores?" The entire human crew turned to stare at him with expressions of such profound pity that several nearby aliens instinctively began preparing funeral arrangements. "Oh, buddy," said Navigation Officer Tommy Chen, shaking his head sadly. "You've never had s'mores? That's actually heartbreaking. They're basically the entire point of camping. You take marshmallows, chocolate, and graham crackers and you roast them over an open fire until they achieve perfect gooey harmony." "You're planning," Vextall said slowly, his 4 hearts beating in patterns that his species' medical texts classified as impending existential crisis, "to roast confections over the molten lava flows of Infernus Prime." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds even better," chirped communications specialist Lisa Park, who was currently stuffing what appeared to be a small tent into her pack. The lava should provide excellent, consistent heat. No worrying about finding dry firewood or dealing with wind. Dr. Quillith, the council's chief xenobiologist, began making rapid calculations on his datapad. His species had evolved from creatures that spent most of their evolutionary history hiding under rocks from things that wanted to eat them, so his danger assessment instincts were finely tuned. The numbers he was getting made no sense whatsoever. "Commander Morrison," he squeaked, his voice hitting frequencies that made the nearby crystalline delegates resonate sympathetically. "Your species' environmental tolerance parameters, they appear to be listed incorrectly in our databases. Surely you cannot survive in temperatures exceeding 200 degrees? Jake looked genuinely confused. 200? That's barely warm enough for a proper sauna. Last summer, Lisa and I went hiking in Death Valley when it hit 120 and we complained the whole time about how cool it was. Right, Lisa? Absolutely frigid, Lisa agreed, pulling out what looked like a collapsible chair designed by someone who'd never seen furniture before but had strong opinions about portability. I had to wear a light jacket. The collective mental breakdown of the Galactic Council was becoming audible. Several delegates had begun making high-pitched keening sounds, while others had simply shut down their higher brain functions as a protective measure. The atmospheric composition, Dr. Quillith continued desperately, consulting his notes like a man clinging to the last piece of debris from a sinking ship of sanity. 90% sulfur compounds. Breathing this would cause immediate cellular breakdown in any known species. "Oh, that's what the filters are for," Tommy said cheerfully, holding up what looked like a standard breathing mask. "Though honestly, sulfur's not that bad. Ever been to Yellowstone? Same smell, really. Kind of nostalgic." "Nostalgic," repeated Vextal faintly. "Yeah, reminds me of camping trips with my dad when I was a kid," Tommy continued. "He used to take us to all the best spots. Volcanic regions, sulfur springs, that one canyon where the rocks were radioactive enough to glow at night. Great family bonding time." Ambassador Kralnux had stopped taking notes entirely and was just staring at his datapad with the hollow expression of someone whose worldview had just been fed through a wood chipper. Your father took you to radioactive locations. For fun. As a child. The educational, too," Jake added helpfully. "Nothing teaches you about geological processes like watching them try to kill you in real time. Builds character." The dropship descended through Infernus Prime's atmosphere with all the grace of a brick learning to tap dance, while atmospheric friction turned the hull into what most species would consider an unacceptable temperature for continued existence. Inside the passenger compartment, the human crew was doing something that defied every known principle of survival psychology. They were getting excited. "Oh man, look at that view!" Tommy pressed his face against the porthole like a kid at an aquarium, completely ignoring the fact that the view consisted of lava geysers shooting molten rock 3 miles into the air. "It's like nature's own fireworks show, except it never stops and everything's on fire." The orbiting alien observation vessels maintained what their commanders considered a safe distance, which in this case meant roughly half a solar system away. On the bridge of the Regalian flagship, Ambassador Vextal watched the human landing through high-powered telescopes with the sort of morbid fascination usually reserved for impending natural disasters. "They're actually doing it," he whispered, his voice containing the same tone people use when describing miracles or particularly impressive traffic accidents. "They're landing on the surface, and are they singing?" The audio pickup confirmed his worst fears. The humans were indeed singing something they called Campfire Songs Volume 7, Volcanic Edition, which apparently included crowd favorites like "This Lava Light of Mine" and "She'll Be Coming Round the Magma Flow." The dropship touched down on what optimistically could be called solid ground, though it was more accurately described as temporarily not molten rock with commitment issues. The landing pad immediately began a slow, inevitable slide toward a nearby lava lake, but the humans seemed to consider this a charming feature rather than a design flaw. "Perfect spot," Jake announced, stepping off the ship and breathing deeply of air that should have liquefied his lungs on contact. "Nice and warm, great ambience, and look at that natural lighting. Lisa, start setting up the base camp. Tommy, see if you can find a good spot for the fire pit." "Fire pit?" Rosa called out, unpacking equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Jake, we're literally standing on a planet made of fire." "Yeah, but it's not the same," Jake replied, with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a small child. "Campfire flames have character. Lava's just impersonal. Where's the fun in roasting marshmallows over a geological process?" Aboard the observation ship, Dr. Quillith had begun taking detailed notes, with the desperate intensity of a scientist watching the laws of physics file for divorce. Subject Morrison has rejected the planet's readily available thermal energy source in favor of creating his own. Reasons given include lack of character and impersonal nature of geological processes. Request immediate psychological evaluation protocols for entire human species. Down on the surface, the humans had begun what they called setting up camp, with the sort of methodical efficiency that would have been impressive if it weren't happening in conditions that should have reduced them to component atoms within the first 30 seconds. Lisa unfolded a shelter that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd taken portable architecture as a personal challenge, while Tommy began arranging rocks in a circle with the focused concentration of a master craftsman. "Found the perfect spot for the tent," Lisa announced cheerfully, hammering stakes into ground that was currently glowing a cheerful orange. "Nice and level, good drainage, and that lava flow over there should provide excellent white noise for sleeping." The tent, it should be noted, was not made of any material known to galactic science. It appeared to be constructed from something that the humans casually referred to as heavy-duty camping fabric, which apparently possessed the miraculous ability to remain intact while pitched directly adjacent to temperatures that could melt starship hulls. "You know what this place needs?" Rosa mused, setting up what appeared to be a collapsible table next to a geyser of molten sulfur. "Some proper camp chairs and maybe a cooler for the drinks. It's going to be a hot one today." The irony was completely lost on her. Tommy had successfully created his fire pit, and was now building what he called a proper campfire, using materials that seemed to consist entirely of refined combustibles that burned at precisely the right temperature for optimal marshmallow preparation. The fact that this required creating a controlled chemical reaction capable of maintaining consistent heat output in an environment where everything was already on fire struck him as perfectly reasonable. "Marshmallows are ready," he announced, threading the white confections onto specially designed roasting sticks that looked suspiciously like they'd been engineered by someone who'd given serious thought to the metallurgy of snack preparation. "Who wants the first batch?" In orbit, 3 different species simultaneously updated their official databases to classify humans as physically impossible but apparently too stubborn to care. The third day of what the humans insisted on calling their relaxing getaway began with Tommy complaining that the sulfur geysers had kept him awake, because they weren't rhythmic enough for proper sleep ambiance. This was, according to galactic records, the first time in recorded history that anyone had criticized a planetary hellscape for insufficient commitment to white noise production. "I'm telling you," Tommy grumbled, poking at the campfire with a stick that should have vaporized but apparently had tenure, "the geezers back on Io had much better timing. These ones are all over the place. Totally unprofessional." Jake emerged from the tent looking like someone who'd just enjoyed the most restful vacation sleep of his life, despite spending the night in conditions that had caused the previous crystalline expedition to achieve what their final transmission described as atomic discorporation with extreme prejudice. "Beautiful morning," he announced, stretching and breathing deeply of air that was 90% sulfur compounds and 10% spite. "You know what? I think today's perfect for a little exploring. We haven't really seen the sights yet." This was technically true. The human definition of seeing the sights apparently required actually walking around and looking at things, rather than the more conventional approach of observing from a safe distance while praying for survival. Previous expeditions had typically managed to collect data for approximately 15 minutes before achieving involuntary molecular redistribution, but they'd never had the opportunity for what humans called getting out and really experiencing the local culture. "I'll grab the hiking gear," Lisa said, pulling on boots that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd studied the engineering principles of moon landings and decided they weren't quite extreme enough. "Rosa, did you pack the geological survey tools?" "Right here," Rosa replied, hefting equipment that looked suspiciously similar to standard scientific instruments, except everything was labeled with helpful notes like lava-proof and rated for hostile environment exploration and warranty void if used on planets with atmospheric temperatures below 500 degrees. The hiking expedition set off across terrain that previous surveys had classified as incompatible with continued existence, but which the humans treated like a particularly interesting nature trail. They maintained a steady pace across crystallized lava flows, pausing occasionally to admire the scenery or take photographs of geological formations that had killed entire research teams through sheer proximity. "Oh, this is gorgeous," Lisa breathed, setting up her camera equipment next to a chasm that glowed with the sort of inner light typically associated with industrial furnaces or the wrath of minor deities. The way the molten rock catches the sulfur vapor, it's like nature's own abstract art installation. Tommy consulted his portable GPS unit, which had been specially modified for use in environments where conventional electronics typically experienced what technical manuals euphemistically called catastrophic functionality cessation. According to the topographical data, there should be some interesting formations about 2 clicks northeast, he announced. The orbital surveys detected some kind of structural anomalies, but nobody's ever gotten close enough to investigate properly. This was, of course, because getting close enough to investigate properly had previously required surviving long enough to actually reach the formations, which had proved problematic for species whose survival strategies didn't include treating planetary death traps as recreational opportunities. The hike continued through what the humans cheerfully described as challenging but doable terrain. This terrain included crossing lava tubes on improvised bridges, navigating around sulfur vents that shot superheated gas 50 feet into the air, and scrambling over crystalline formations that resonated with harmonic frequencies capable of liquefying most known materials. "You know what I love about camping?" Rosa mused, carefully stepping around a pool of molten copper while adjusting her pack straps. "It really gets you back in touch with the natural world. None of that artificial city stuff. Just you, the elements, and the raw beauty of geological processes trying to kill you." It was Tommy who first spotted the anomaly. "Hey guys, check this out," he called, pointing toward what appeared to be a section of cliff face that was slightly less committed to the general principle of being on fire. "That doesn't look like natural rock formation." The humans approached with the casual curiosity of tourists discovering an interesting roadside attraction, rather than the careful terror that should have accompanied the discovery of artificial structures on a planet where life expectancy was typically measured in minutes. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake whistled, running his hands along what was clearly a carved stone surface. "It's some kind of building, or maybe a temple? The stonework is incredible. Look at this craftsmanship." The structure that emerged from their careful excavation, because of course they'd brought portable excavation tools on their camping trip, was unlike anything in the galactic archaeological databases. The architecture suggested a civilization that had not only survived on Infernus Prime, but had actually thrived here, creating art and monuments in conditions that current galactic science considered incompatible with organized matter, let alone organized society. "These inscriptions," Lisa murmured, carefully photographing symbols carved into stone that should have melted eons ago. "They're beautiful, and look, there are more structures further up the cliff face. This wasn't just a building, it was an entire city." "The crystalline formations," Rosa added, collecting samples with equipment that beeped happily despite being exposed to conditions that typically caused scientific instruments to file formal complaints with their manufacturers. "They're not natural. Someone cultivated these, probably harvested them. These crystals, the energy readings are off the charts." Tommy was examining what appeared to be a sophisticated water management system that had been designed to channel and control lava flows for practical purposes. "Incredible engineering," he said admiringly. "They turned the entire volcanic system into infrastructure. Heating, power generation, manufacturing. They built a civilization that used the planet's hostility as a resource." The discovery was, by any reasonable measure, the archaeological find of the millennium. An entire lost civilization, perfectly preserved by conditions that had prevented any other species from getting close enough to disturb the site. Art, technology, and cultural artifacts from a people who had mastered survival in an environment that current galactic science considered theoretically impossible to inhabit. The humans treated it as a mildly interesting diversion from their vacation. "This is so cool," Jake said, settling down on a stone bench that had been carved from living rock and was currently radiating heat that would have qualified as a weapon under several galactic treaties. "You know what? I think we should set up lunch here. This view is spectacular." In orbit, Ambassador Vextal stared at the incoming data streams with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality had just been gently but firmly escorted from the premises. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with all the organized chaos of a reality having a nervous breakdown. Ambassador Vextal stood at the central podium, clutching a data tablet with the desperate grip of someone whose worldview had been systematically disassembled by a species that considered molten death worlds suitable for weekend getaways. "Esteemed colleagues," Vextal began, his voice carrying the slightly unhinged quality of someone who'd spent the last 72 hours watching impossible things happen with casual regularity. "I present the preliminary findings from the Infernus Prime expedition." The assembled delegates leaned forward with the sort of intense attention usually reserved for impending apocalypses or particularly good gossip. The holographic display activated, showing images that caused several species to experience what their medical personnel would later classify as cognitive system crashes due to logical impossibility overload. Day 1, Vextal continued, consulting his notes with the mechanical precision of someone whose sanity was being held together by bureaucratic procedure. The human crew established what they termed base camp in conditions registering 837 degrees surface temperature. They complained that the weather was a bit muggy and requested better ventilation for their sleeping arrangements. Dr. Quillath raised a trembling appendage. Ambassador, our xenobiology databases indicate that human cellular structure should experience catastrophic breakdown at temperatures exceeding 300 degrees. How are they defining muggy? According to communications specialist Park, Vextal replied, reading directly from his transcript, with the tone of someone reciting an alien scripture. Muggy refers to that sticky feeling you get when it's hot but not quite hot enough to be comfortable. She expressed hope that the temperature would pick up a bit by midweek. The silence that followed was so profound that several species temporarily forgot how to maintain basic biological functions. In the methane breather section, Ambassador Glocksnar began making small whimpering sounds that his translator rendered as "does not compute," requesting system restart. Day 2, Vextel continued with the inexorable march of someone reading the minutes of reality's resignation letter. The humans expressed dissatisfaction with the local geological activity. Navigation Officer Chen filed a formal complaint that the sulfur geysers lacked proper rhythm and were unprofessional in their eruption patterns. He filed a complaint, repeated Council Speaker Zephalon slowly, against a planetary geological process for being unprofessional, so that whoever began it first and finished it second would have up to 12 years of army service and the same life, comfortable living. The complaint was submitted in triplicate, Vextal confirmed, with recommendations for improvement including more consistent timing and better integration with natural sleep cycles. Officer Chen suggested that the planet might benefit from taking lessons from Yellowstone, which really knows how to do geothermal features properly. The crystalline collective's representative began resonating at frequencies that indicated either deep meditation or complete structural failure. It was difficult to tell which. Day 3 brought the archaeological discovery, Vextal announced, and the chamber's atmosphere shifted from bewildered horror to something approaching electrical anticipation. The humans located and excavated ruins of an advanced civilization that had achieved sustainable habitation on Infernus Prime. The site includes intact architecture, technological artifacts, and crystalline formations, with unprecedented energy sourcial capabilities. The chamber erupted in multilingual celebration. Finally, something that made sense. A discovery of this magnitude would revolutionize galactic archaeology, xenotechnology, and their understanding of environmental adaptation. This was the kind of breakthrough that justified the entire expedition, the sort of discovery that would... Commander Morrison's official report, Vextal continued, consulting his datapad, describes the find as pretty neat and notes that the ancient architecture provided excellent shade for our picnic lunch. He expressed particular appreciation for what he termed the authentic rustic atmosphere of the ruins. The celebration died with the abruptness of a record player being fed into a wood chipper. Picnic lunch, Council Speaker Zephalon repeated faintly. Grilled sandwiches and fruit salad, Vextal confirmed. Engineer Martinez noted that the ancient crystalline formations made surprisingly good cup holders, and that the acoustics in the main temple were perfect for sing-alongs. Dr. Quillath had begun, taking rapid notes with the frantic intensity of someone documenting the heat death of logic. The energy readings from those crystals could revolutionize our power generation technology. The architectural techniques could allow us to colonize previously uninhabitable worlds. The implications for xenoarchaeological theory alone. Communications specialist Park, Vextal interrupted, rated the discovery 4 out of 5 stars in what she called her camping trip review. Points were deducted because, and I quote, the Wi-Fi reception was terrible and there weren't enough hiking trails with scenic overlooks. The assembled delegates stared at him with expressions that somehow managed to convey both existential dread and the growing suspicion that the universe was being operated by cosmic forces with a deeply inappropriate sense of humor. The humans, Ambassador Krellock said slowly, his 4 eyes rotating in patterns that xenobiologists would later study as examples of advanced confusion responses, have made the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history. on a planet that kills everything that approaches it, and they're treating it as inadequate recreational programming. It appears to be an accurate summary, Vextal confirmed. And they're planning to return? Dr. Quillith asked desperately, clinging to his datapad like a life preserver in an ocean of impossibility. Vextal consulted his final notes. Commander Morrison expressed enthusiasm for making this an annual tradition, and suggested that next year they might try that ice world in the Vega system, because it would be a nice change of pace and might offer better opportunities for winter sport. The ice world in the Vega system was officially classified as uninhabitable due to temperatures approaching absolute zero and atmospheric conditions consisting entirely of crystallized methane and spite. He specifically requested, Vextal added, that we recommend some good camping spots with proper facilities for ice fishing. Council Speaker Zephalon slowly lowered his head to his desk with a soft thunk that somehow managed to express the collective resignation of an entire galaxy. 3 galactic standard months after what historians would eventually term the Inferno incident, the quarterly Galactic Council session had taken on the subdued atmosphere of a support group for beings whose fundamental understanding of reality had been gently but thoroughly demolished by a species that packed marshmallows for trips to hell. Ambassador Vextal stood before the assembled delegates, no longer the confident diplomat who had once believed the universe operated according to predictable principles. His 4 eyes now moved in slow, hypnotic patterns that his species' medical professionals had classified as philosophical adjustment syndrome with complications of existential bewilderment. The final report on the Inferno's Prime expedition, he announced, his voice carrying the hollow resonance of someone who had stared into the abyss of human logic and found it staring back with cheerful indifference, has been completed and distributed to all member species. The report itself had required the creation of entirely new categories in the galactic filing system. Previous expedition reports typically contained sections like survival duration, casualty assessment, and recommended memorial services. The human report included categories such as recreational activities attempted, local cuisine evaluation, and suggested improvements for future tourism development. Dr. Quillith, who had spent the intervening months attempting to reconcile human physiology with the basic laws of physics, raised a trembling appendage. Ambassador, the technological implications of their discoveries. Surely the humans understand the significance of what they've found? Vextal consulted his notes with the mechanical precision of someone whose job had evolved from diplomatic representative to interpreter of cosmic practical jokes. Commander Morrison's follow-up communication, he read aloud, expressed appreciation for our interest in their vacation photos, and offered to share what he called camping tips for anyone else planning to visit Infernus Prime. His recommendations include bringing extra sunscreen, packing light but durable cooking equipment, and checking the local weather reports for unusually active lava flow periods. Sunscreen, repeated Council Speaker Zephalon, his voice containing all the emotional depth of someone whose worldview had been professionally demolished by expert contractors. For a planet with surface temperatures exceeding 800 degrees, SPF 50, minimum, Vexel confirmed. Engineer Martinez specifically noted that anything less would result in what she termed an uncomfortable first day of vacation. The Rigelian representative, whose species had evolved from cautious burrowing creatures with highly developed survival instincts, began making small sounds that his translator rendered as "System error, please restart universe." The crystalline formations they discovered, Dr. Quillith pressed on with the desperate persistence of someone clinging to scientific rationality in an increasingly irrational cosmos, could revolutionize energy storage technology across the galaxy. Surely they must recognize the commercial applications. Vextal turned to a different section of his report. Navigation Officer Chen expressed mild interest in the crystal's aesthetic properties, noting that they would look really cool in a rock garden and that the way they glowed might make them good mood lighting for future camping trips. He suggested that we might want to check if they come in different colors to provide more decorating options. The silence that followed was so complete that several species began wondering if sound itself had filed for early retirement. The architectural techniques, Ambassador Krelnox ventured weakly, the engineering principles that allowed an entire civilization to thrive in those conditions. Certainly the humans appreciate the scientific breakthrough. Communications Specialist Park, Vextail read with the steady cadence of someone reciting an elegy for logic itself, rated the ancient architecture as pretty good, but noted that the builders could have used more windows for better natural lighting, and that the lack of proper bathroom facilities made the site less convenient for extended stays. The assembled delegates stared at him with expressions that somehow managed to convey both profound respect and the growing certainty that humans represented either the universe's greatest evolutionary success story or its most elaborate evolutionary practical joke. She did, however, Vextal continued, compliment the ancient civilization's excellent choice of location and noted that they clearly knew how to pick a spot with good ambiance and reliable heating. Dr. Quilyath had begun updating his databases, with the sort of mechanical determination typically associated with beings experiencing cognitive system failures. The implications for galactic colonization efforts? With human assistance, we could establish settlements on worlds previously considered uninhabitable. Commander Morrison expressed polite interest in our colonization proposals, Vextel reported, but noted that large-scale settlement might ruin the natural beauty of the place and spoil the wilderness experience for future camping enthusiasts. He suggested that we might want to consider less pristine locations for our colonization efforts. Less pristine, Council Speaker Zephilon repeated slowly, than a planet made entirely of molten rock and poisonous gas. He recommended several alternatives, Vextal confirmed, including gas giants with interesting atmospheric dynamics, neutron stars with unique gravitational challenges, and black hole event horizons, which he described as offering the ultimate extreme camping experience. The realization that was slowly dawning across the galactic community carried with it the sort of cosmic significance typically associated with discovering new laws of physics or accidentally dividing by zero. Humans didn't conquer hostile environments through superior technology, advanced planning, or sophisticated survival strategies. They simply refused to acknowledge that places were supposed to be uninhabitable. The final rating, Vextal announced, reaching the conclusion of his report with the weary resignation of someone whose job description had evolved far beyond its original parameters, awarded by the human expedition team for their experience on Infernus Prime. The chamber held its collective breath, which for several species required conscious effort to maintain. 3 stars out of 5, Vextal concluded. Points were deducted for predictable lava flow patterns, insufficient variety in geological formations, and limited opportunities for water sports. The review concluded with a note that while Infernus Prime was a decent camping destination, they were looking forward to trying somewhere with better hiking trails and maybe some wildlife to observe. In the profound silence that followed, the universe itself seemed to pause and reconsider some of its more fundamental operating principles. They're already planning their next trip, Vexel added quietly. A nice relaxing weekend on the ice moon of Proxima Centauri, where the surface temperature approaches absolute zero and the atmosphere consists entirely of crystallized methane. Commander Morrison specifically requested recommendations for good spots for ice fishing, and asked if anyone knew whether the local conditions were suitable for building snow forts. And in that moment, the Galactic Council finally understood the truth that would reshape their understanding of the universe. Humans hadn't conquered the galaxy's most hostile environments. They had simply gone camping there and left reviews,